We counted 81 head at dusk on the 14th of November, 1978. By first light on the 15th, we counted 63, and 4 of the missing 18 were never recovered in any form a man could bury. My brother Harrison was gone from the bunk beside mine, his boots still under it, laced, which he never did. And the dog that had worked our fence line for 9 winters was found on the roof of the pump house, 40 feet up a sheer, galvanized wall, with no marks on the metal and no way I've ever been able to explain how it got there. The Bureau of Indian Affairs stock report for that season lists the loss as predation, probable, canid, weather aggravated. I signed a statement to that effect because Sergeant Yazzie asked me to, and because I was 26 and did not have another word for what I had seen. This is the other word. I am giving it now because I am the last of the 4 adults who were on that mesa, and because the record they filed leaves out everything that mattered. My name is Delbert Tsosie. I was born in 1952 near Rough Rock on the Navajo Nation, and I ran cattle with my family on a grazing permit in the high country south of Black Mesa for most of my working life. I am not a man who traffics in stories. I spent 19 years after that night driving a water truck for the chapter house, and I never once told the story to the men I worked beside. What I will tell you, I saw, or I heard from someone who saw it, and where I did not see it, I will say so. The place was called Tudil Hill by the old people, which a school teacher once translated for me as dark water, though the spring there ran clear. It sat at about 7,000 feet, a shelf of pinon and juniper above a dry wash, 31 miles by dirt track from the nearest paved road, and a good deal further from anyone who could have helped us. In November, the track froze at night and turned to grease by noon. We had no telephone. We had a CB radio in the truck that reached the chapter house on good days and reached nothing at all when the weather came down off the mesa, which it did on the 13th, and did not lift for 3 days. I want to be precise about the cattle, because the count is the part no one has ever been able to argue with me about. My father kept a tally book, a green ledger with a rubber band around it, and he wrote the head count in it every evening in pencil. 81 on the 14th. It is still 81 on the page. He never crossed it out. When I found 63 at dawn, I did not believe my own eyes. So I counted them 4 times, walking the whole herd, and the number held. Cattle do not vanish quietly in the night. A cow is a large, loud, stubborn animal. 18 of them leaving a tight winter bunch should have made noise enough to wake the dead, and should have left a trail a child could follow through fresh snow. There was no trail. That is the first thing I need you to sit with. 2 inches of new snow had fallen before midnight and stopped clean. And in the morning that snow was unmarked, except for our own boot prints and, in one place near the loading chute, a single set of tracks that I will come back to when I have the stomach for it. 18 head of cattle did not walk out across that snow. They were not driven out. As near as I can reconstruct it, they were taken from inside a fenced pen without the fence being opened. And I have spent 47 years failing to make that sentence sound like anything but madness. Harrison was 2 years older than me. He was the careful one, the one who checked the gate latch twice. The night of the 14th, he took the second watch, midnight to 4, because the herd had been uneasy since sundown, and my father wanted a man awake. I remember Harrison pulling on his coat and saying the horses wouldn't settle, and my father telling him it was the wind coming down off the rim. It was not the wind. I lay in the bunk and listened to the horses for a while, and there was a note in it I'd never heard from a horse before or since. Not a whinny and not a scream. Something in between that they held too long. Then I fell asleep, God forgive me. And when I woke it was gray outside, and the watch fire was cold, and Harrison's boots were under his bunk, laced, and Harrison was not in them. We searched the ordinary way first. You do not leap to the impossible when a man is missing on a cold mesa. You assume he wandered, or fell, or went after a straying animal and turned an ankle. My father and I and the two hired men, Roman Bigay and an older fellow we called Curly, walked out in 4 directions with the light growing. We called his name until we were hoarse, and the snow told us plainly that Harrison had not walked anywhere. His boot prints ended at the watchfire. There was no 5th direction for a man to go, and there were no prints leaving it except ours. Curly was the one who found the dog. He didn't call out. He just stopped walking and stood looking up at the pump house. And when I came alongside him, he pointed with his chin the way the old men do. And I looked up and saw Nudley. That was the dog's name. A blue heeler my mother had raised from a pup, lying on the crown of that steel roof with her legs folded under her, as neat as if she had chosen the spot. She was dead. There was not a mark on her that any of us could find. And there was no ladder, no woodpile, no drift of snow, no thing whatsoever that a 40-pound dog could have used to get herself 40 feet up a smooth wall. Curly, who was maybe 70 and had ridden that country his whole life, said one word in Navajo that I will not repeat here. And then he would not say anything else at all for the rest of that day. I have thought about that silence a great deal. Curly was not a superstitious man in the way outsiders mean it. He was a practical old cowboy who could set a bone and read weather and shoe a mule. When a man like that looks at a thing and goes quiet, it is because the thing has told him something he already knew and had hoped never to see confirmed. He knew what the tracks by the loading chute meant. I did not yet. That was the difference between us that morning. And it is the difference this account is going to close, hour by hour, until you know what he knew. By the time the sun cleared the rim, we had a dead dog we could not explain, a missing brother with no trail, 18 had gone from a shut pen, and 4 grown men standing in the snow, not saying the thing that each of us was starting to think. My father was the one who broke it. He was a hard, sober man, a former tribal police officer who had left the force to run stock, and he did not tolerate wild talk. He looked at the whole scene, at the roof and the empty pen and the unmarked snow. And he said we would drive the truck out to the chapter house and report the loss to the county and the bureau, and that there would be a reasonable account of it, and that no one was to speak of anything else until we had that account in hand. He believed that. I want to be fair to my father, because he is central to everything that came after and because he paid for his belief. He held to the reasonable account longer than any of us, longer than he should have. And when it finally failed him, it failed all at once, and in the dark. And there was nothing left of the man's certainty by the 3rd night. But on the morning of the 15th, he still had it whole, and it steadied us, and we did what he said. We walked back toward the truck to drive out for help. The truck would not start. I checked it myself, and I was good with engines. The battery was strong, the fuel was full, and the engine turned over clean and would not catch. And when I opened the hood to look, I found the one thing from that whole 3 days that I have never told another living soul until now. I am going to tell it in the next part, because I need to tell it in order, the way it happened, so that you understand it did not come to us as a monster in the dark. It came to us as a series of small, impossible facts, each one alone deniable, that we spent 3 days trying to explain and could not. And by the time we stopped trying to explain them, the thing that had made them was already standing between us and the only road down. Under the hood, laid across the top of the engine block, was a length of the horse's picket rope tied in a knot I did not recognize and have never seen since. It was not a knot of cowboy ties. A working knot has a purpose. You can read with your hands. This one had loops that went nowhere, doubled back on themselves, and the rope had been passed through the fan and around the radiator hose in a way that would have taken a man 10 unhurried minutes with both hands free and a lantern. It had been done in the dark, inside a locked truck cab, sometime between midnight and dawn, while Harrison was on watch 40 feet away. The cab doors had been shut. I remember that clearly because I had to open them to get in. And the interior light came on the way it always did. I did not tell my father. I told myself it was a thing one of the hired men had done and forgotten, or a joke, though we were well past joking by then. I cut the rope off with my pocket knife, coiled it, and put it behind the seat. And the truck started on the first turn of the key, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. I have kept that piece of rope for 47 years. It is in a coffee can on the shelf above where I'm sitting now. I have shown it to exactly 2 people, and neither of them could tell me who ties a knot like that. And one of them was a man who spliced cable for the phone company for 30 years and knew every knot there is. I need to slow down here and put the world in front of you properly, because if you do not understand the place and the people, the rest of it will sound like the ravings I was afraid it would sound like, which is why I never told it. We were not squatters, and we were not lost. My family had held that grazing permit since before I was born. The permit is a serious document on the reservation. It is the right to run a certain number of head on a certain allotment. And it is fought over and inherited, and it does not come easy. My father had built the operation up from 9 cows to over 80. And 80 head at 1978 prices was more money than most families in our chapter saw in 5 years. That is why we were up there in November instead of down in the valley where sensible people wintered. We were pushing the season to put weight on the calves, and there was a buyer in Flagstaff who wanted them before Christmas. And my father had made him a promise. Every man on that mesa was there because of that promise and the money behind it. I say this so you understand. We had powerful reasons to stay and explain things away. Men who have a fortune standing in a pen do not abandon it over a strange knot and a dead dog. Not on the first day. The 4 of us were an ordinary crew. My father, Wilson Tsosie, 54 that winter, ex-tribal police, a man who wrote things in a ledger and did not raise his voice. Myself, 26, the mechanic and the second rider. Roman Bigay, who was maybe 30, a quiet hard worker with a wife and a baby down in Chinle, in it purely for the wage. And Curly, whose given name I'm ashamed to say I never learned. Everyone had called him Curly for 50 years, who was the oldest and the best stockman among us, and who came, I think now, less for the wage than because he knew that country and did not want younger men up there in it alone. Harrison made 5. Now there were 4. We had a 1-room stone cabin my grandfather had built, a lean-to for the tack, the galvanized pump house over the spring, a set of pole corrals, and the loading chute where a truck could back up to take on cattle. That was the whole of it. The nearest neighbor with a permit, an old woman named Mrs. Nez, ran sheep about 9 miles east. And she had gone down to the valley in October like a sensible person. There was no one between us and the paved road but her empty hogan. The land itself I loved and still love. Pinon and juniper thin out as you climb. And up on that shelf, they grew in scattered dark clumps with open ground between, so you could see a long way in daylight. The spring came up cold and clear at the base of a sandstone rise, and there were petroglyphs on that rise, spirals and handprints, and a tall figure with horns that the old people said not to look at too long. I had grown up not looking at it too long the way a town child learns not to touch a stove. It was simply a rule. No one had ever explained it, and I had never asked. That is a thing about the way I was raised that outsiders find hard to credit. There were places you did not go, and things you did not say, and you did not demand reasons, because the reasons were understood to be older and heavier than you were. When we got the truck running, my father drove it out toward the chapter house with Roman riding along, and Curly and I stayed to hold the cattle. That was the 15th, midday. The plan was sound. My father would report the missing man and the missing stock, bring back the county sheriff or the tribal police or both, and there would be a search and a reasonable explanation. He expected to be back before dark with help. He was back before dark. He came alone, on foot, without the truck and without Roman. And the look on his face is the second thing I have carried 47 years. The truck, he said, had quit again 11 miles down the track. At the place where the road crosses the dry wash below Mrs. Nez's hogan. Quit the same way, turned over clean and would not catch. He and Roman had gotten out to look at it, and Roman had walked up the bank to Mrs. Nez's place to see if her old truck was there to borrow. And Roman had not come back. My father had waited and called and finally walked up to the hogan himself and found it empty and shut, and found Roman's hat on the ground by the door and Roman's tracks going in and no tracks coming out, and the door of the hogan latched from the outside the way you leave a place you have locked up for the winter. He had walked back to our truck and it still would not start. So he had walked home. 11 miles. He got in a little after 4 with the light already going, and his hands were shaking, and he was not a man whose hands shook. Now there were 3 of us. In one day, the Mesa had taken my brother and a hired man and left us a truck that ran when it chose to and quit when it chose to. Always at a distance from help. Always where a man alone would step away from the others to have a closer look. I did not see the pattern that first evening. Curly saw it. When my father finished talking, Curly said in English, so that all of us would understand, that no one was to go anywhere alone anymore. Not to the spring, not to the wood pile, not 10 feet past the light. My father started to say something about superstition and then stopped, because a hired man was gone, and a truck that I had personally fixed had quit twice at the worst possible place. And even a rational man runs out of rope. I want to be honest that my father did not yet believe what Curly believed. He believed we had a bad situation, a predator, maybe a person, maybe a man up there in the rocks moving stock and doing harm, a rustler or a lunatic. That was still a reasonable account. It even fits some of the facts, the way a coat that is too small still goes on if you force it. A man could have driven off cattle if there had been tracks. A man could have hidden Roman's body. A man could not have put a live dog on a smooth roof or tied that knot inside a locked cab. But my father had not seen the knot, because I had not shown him. And I understand now that my silence about the rope let him hold his reasonable account 1 day longer than he should have. That is the one thing I did in those 3 days that I have never forgiven myself for, and I will tell you plainly why it mattered when we get to the 3rd night. That evening, we brought the horses in close and built the fire up, and the 3 of us sat with our backs to the cabin wall and our faces to the dark. And Curly told us, quietly, the first part of what he knew. He did not use the word outsiders use. He said there was a thing that a person could become, or a thing that could wear a person, and that it was not an animal and could not be treated as one, and that it had rules. It went where it was not wanted, and it took what it was not given. But it did not simply fall on you. It watched first. It learned the place and the people. It took the ones who stepped away from the others, and it left the count wrong on purpose, so that you would keep looking Keep going out. Keep separating. The taking was not hunger, Curly said. It was something closer to the way a man will pull down another man's fence, post by post, to make a point about whose ground it was. I asked him how you made it stop. He looked at the fire for a while, and then he said the only answer he had, which was that mostly you did not make it stop. You left. You left the ground to it, and you did not come back. And if you were slow to understand that, it helped you understand it. My father said we would leave in the morning, on foot if we had to, all three together, and walk out the 31 miles and not stop for anything. It was the right decision, and it came, I think, about 18 hours too late, though none of us knew that yet. We did not sleep. We kept the fire, and we kept together, and we listened. And a little after what I judged to be midnight, the horses started that long, held note again, the one that is not a whinny and not a scream. And from somewhere out past the pole corrals, from the direction of the sandstone rise where the petroglyphs are, something answered them in a voice that had my brother Harrison's laugh in it. I have to be careful here, because this is the part where a man is most tempted to make it worse than it was. And the truth is that it did not need any help. It was Harrison's laugh. I had heard that laugh my whole life. He laughed low and short, 2 notes, with a catch in it from a horse that had cracked a rib of his when he was 19, so that the second note always came a little strangled. That catch was in it. It came from out past the corrals, from the dark at the foot of the rise, and it came twice, spaced apart like a man laughing at something, and then a moment later, laughing again at the same thing. None of us moved. I want that understood. We did not go running out into the dark calling his name, because Curly had told us the rule and because some animal part of me knew. The way you know a stair is not there in the dark before your foot proves it. That the thing at the foot of the rise wanted me to come. My father had his rifle across his knees. He did not raise it. He sat very still, and he said, not loudly, "That is not your brother." He said it to me. I think he was also saying it to himself. And I think it was the first sentence he spoke in those 3 days that came from the other account, the one he had been refusing. And once a man says a sentence like that out loud, he cannot fully unsay it. The laugh did not come again. Instead, for the rest of that night, at intervals I could not predict, we heard sounds from the dark that were almost right and never quite. A cow's low, but pitched a shade too high, held a shade too long. The chuff of a horse, from a direction where no horse was. Once, my mother's voice, saying my name, my mother, who was 50 miles away in the valley, safe, whom I confirmed safe a week later, saying, Delbert, once, clearly from beyond the woodpile, in her voice exactly. I did not answer. Curly reached over in the dark and put his hand flat on my chest, not gripping, just resting there, the way you steady a young horse. And I understood he had put it there before I could stand up, which means the old man had known I would want to stand up before I knew it myself. That is the thing I most want to convey about how it worked. It did not attack the fire. It never once, in 3 nights, came at 3 men sitting together in the light. It worked on the space around us and on the inside of our heads, and it was patient, and it was accurate. It had listened long enough to have our voices, and the voices of the people we loved, and it spent them carefully, one at a time, to see which of us would break the rule and step away from the others into the dark. It was, I understood much later, still doing the same thing it had done to Harrison and to Roman. It had simply run out of men who would walk off alone. So now it was trying to make us into such men. By first light, we were still 3, and we were done. My father put out the fire himself, which he had never let another man do at a camp. And we filled canteens at the spring, all three of us walking down to it together. Curly in front and my father behind with the rifle. And we took what food we could carry, and we started walking down the track toward the paved road. It was the 16th. The plan was 31 miles on foot, altogether. No stopping, no stepping aside, and out by dark or by the following dawn at the latest. We made about 4 miles. I will tell you exactly what stopped us, because it is the plainest piece of physical evidence in the whole account, and it is the one I have gone back to look at with my own eyes more than once in the years since. When I needed to know, I had not dreamed it. Where the track drops through a cut in the sandstone, narrow enough that a truck's mirrors nearly brushed the walls, the way was closed. Not blocked by a rockfall, closed. Someone, I used the word for lack of another, had brought the cattle there. Our missing cattle. Some of the 18. They were standing in the cut, filling it wall to wall, packed in tight and facing us. And they were alive, and they did not move, and they did not make a sound. Cattle in a tight space shift and blow and rub. These stood like fence posts. I counted 11 of them that I could see, and behind them the cut curved, so I could not see how many more. Their eyes were open. My father walked up to the lead cow, a big brockle-faced thing I had bottle-fed as a calf and knew by name. And he waved his hat in her face, and she did not blink. And he put his hand on her shoulder and jerked it back as if he'd touched a stove. And he told me later the animal was cold. Not dead, she was breathing. I saw her breathing, but cold to the touch, cold like the ground in the morning, and standing. We did not try to push through them. I do not fully know why. Curly turned us around without a word, and we walked back the way we had come. And behind us, when we were maybe 100 yards on, we heard the cattle move. At last, all at once, the whole packed mass of them. But the sound was wrong. Not the shuffle of animals stepping, but a single, soft settling, like a load shifting. And when I looked back, the cut was empty. Empty. 11 or more head of cattle gone from a stone corridor in the 4 seconds my eyes were off it, with walls too high to climb and no room to turn. I have told you I would give you the evidence in classes, and I want to name them now the way I have come to understand them, because it is the only way I have ever been able to hold the thing at arm's length long enough to think about it. There was the count 81, then 63, then Harrison, then Roman, the arithmetic that never worked and was never meant to. There was the placement, the dog on the roof, the knot in the locked cab, the cattle in the cut, each one a thing arranged where it could not have been arranged. And arranged, I came to believe specifically so, that we would see it and know that the arranging had been done. And there were the voices, which were the cheapest evidence in one sense, air and mimicry, and the most expensive in another, because they were made out of the people we loved, and they were spent to pull us apart. That afternoon, back at the cabin, my father did a thing that told me how far his reasonable account had failed him. He took his ledger, the green one, with the rubber band, and he sat at the plank table, and he did not open it to write the day's count. He turned instead to the last written page, 81, in his own pencil, from the 14th, and he sat looking at that number for a long time. Then he took the pencil, and he wrote under it, not a number, but a sentence. He wrote, "The count is being kept against us." I read it upside down across the table, and I did not ask him what he meant, because I understood what he meant, and understanding it was worse than not. It was then that Curly told us the second part of what he knew, the part he had held back the first night, because he said there had been no use in it while my father still believed a man was doing this. He said the rise with the petroglyphs was a place the old people had marked as one to leave alone, and that the tall, horned figure carved there was not a picture of a god or a hunt, but a warning. The way a skull on a bottle is a warning, put there by people who had needed to tell the people coming after them, not here. He said his own grandfather had grazed sheep on this shelf as a young man, and had lost a brother to the same thing in the same way, a brother who walked off from a night fire after a voice and did not come back, and had left the shelf and never returned, and had told the family to never take the permit if it were ever offered. And it had been offered once, decades back, and refused, and had passed instead to strangers, and eventually, through the way permits move, to my father, who had not known the story because it was not his family's story, and no one tells another family's dead. My father listened to all of this, with his hands flat on the ledger. When Curly finished, my father asked him one question, and it was the question of a police officer and not of a frightened man. And it is the question that shows me he was still trying, even then, to be the rational authority he had been his whole life. He asked Curly, "If it takes the ones who step away, and it is trying to make us step away, then it cannot take us while we stay together. Is that the rule?" Curly did not answer right away. And the fact that he did not answer right away is the thing that finally frightened me more than the laugh or the dog or the cold cattle. Because up to that point, Curly had known the rules and had stated them plainly. And now, on the one rule our 3 lives depended on, the old man looked at the fire and would not meet my father's eyes. And I understood that we had come to the edge of what even Curly knew, and that beyond that edge there were no rules that anyone alive had lived to bring back. Curly answered finally, but not the way my father wanted. He said the rule about staying together was real, and it had held for as long as anyone in his family had told the story. But he said it the way a man tells you the ice has always held before, which is not the same as telling you it will hold tonight. Then he said the part he had truly been holding back, and he said it looking at me, not at my father, because I think he had decided I was the one most likely to live to repeat it. He said the thing did not only take, it learned. Each time it took one of us, it knew more of us, our voices, yes, but more than that, our habits, the shape of how we thought, the exact thing each man would step away from the fire to save. It had Harrison now, and Roman, and whatever a man knows, it knew. Which meant it knew that my father checked the horses when he could not sleep, and that I could not stand to hear my mother's voice in distress, and that Curly himself was old, and would not run, and would spend himself to buy the young men time. It was not 3 strangers against a monster in the dark. It was 3 men against something that had been quietly reading them for 2 days, and had already turned 2 of them into parts of itself. Curly said the old people had a saying he would not translate exactly, but the sense of it was that the longer it stayed near you, the more it wore your own face, until at the end you could not always tell it from your own people, and that this was the true danger of the 3rd night, not the taking, but the confusion. The moment you could no longer be sure which voice at the fire was still a man. I did not sleep that afternoon, though I tried. When the lights started to go, we made our arrangements like men who had accepted something. We brought the 2 remaining horses inside the tack lean-to and tied them, because a horse taken in the night was a voice given to the thing, and my father said he would not feed it any more voices than it already had. We moved the fire tight against the cabin's stone wall so no man would have his back to open dark. We laid out what we had: my father's rifle and a box of shells, Curly's old lever gun, my own shotgun with bird shot that I knew even then would be no use, and the axe. And my father made the one plan that still had reason in it. At first light, he said, we would cut the horses loose to carry 2 of us, and the 3rd would ride behind. And we would go not down the track where the cut had been closed against us, but cross country, east, toward Mrs. Nez's and the paved road beyond, over open ground where nothing could stand in a stone corridor and wait for us. It was a good plan. I've gone over it many times, and I cannot find the flaw in it. And I have come to believe it had no flaw, and that this is exactly why it was not allowed to happen. The 3rd night came on clear and very cold, the coldest of the 3, with the stars hard and close the way they get at that altitude. And for the first 2 hours, nothing happened at all. And the nothing was worse than the sounds had been. Then it started. But it had changed. It did not throw voices from the dark anymore. It brought them close. The first was Roman. We heard him walk up out of the dark from the direction of the corrals, ordinary footsteps in the frozen grass. And we heard him say, in Roman's tired voice, that he had gotten the old woman's truck running and it was down at the wash, and we should come now, all of us, while it would still start. He sounded exhausted and cold and entirely like a man. He stopped just past the edge of the firelight, where we could hear him but not quite see him. A shape darker than the dark. My father raised the rifle and told the shape to step into the light. The shape did not. It said in Roman's voice, "Wilson, it's me. Don't point that thing." And it used my father's first name the way Roman never had, because Roman had always called him Mr. Tsosie, and that single wrong word was the only thing that kept my father's fingers still and kept all 3 of us in our places against the wall. The shape waited a while. Then it went back into the dark, walking. And we heard the footsteps recede. And then we heard them stop. And we did not hear them start again. I tell you the smell now, because it came with the shape, and I have never smelled it since. And I would know it in an instant if I did. It was not rot, which is what the outsiders always want it to be. It was the smell of a wet dog and cold ashes, and under that, something sweetish and wrong, like meat that has been kept too long in a cellar, faint, carried on no wind because there was no wind that night. It got stronger when the shape was close, and it faded when the shape withdrew. And by that smell alone, with my eyes shut, I could have told you how near the thing was standing. Curly noticed I had gone rigid, and he leaned to my ear and said, very low, that when the smell came, I was to breathe through my mouth and keep my eyes on the fire and not on the dark, because the dark was what it wanted my eyes in. I did as he said. It is the only reason, I think, that I did not see the thing fully that night. And not seeing it fully that night is the only reason I'm able to sit here now. It came back 3 more times before the worst of it, and each time it wore a nearer voice. It came as my father's own voice once, from behind the cabin, calling the 2 of us to come around the back, where he said he'd found sign of the horses breaking loose, and my father was sitting right beside me when it did. And he heard himself out there, in the dark, saying words he had not said. And I watched something go out of him at that, some last lit thing behind his eyes. Because a man can bear a great deal, but I do not think a man is built to hear his own voice used against the people he is trying to save. He put his face down for a moment. Then he lifted it, and he was still my father, but older, the way Curly was old, as if the sound had aged him past his years in the space of a breath. And then it stopped pretending. That is the only way I can say it. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, the voices ceased all at once. And the horses in the lean-to went silent too, which was worse. And the cold got deeper still. And the smell came and did not fade and stayed, which meant the thing had come close and was not leaving. We could hear it breathing. It breathed out past the edge of the light, slow and deep and even. A big sound, bigger than a man, with a faint whistle at the top of each breath, like air through a cracked reed. And it circled. It walked the edge of the firelight, all the way around the cabin, once, slow, its breath keeping time with its steps, and we turned where we sat to keep our faces to it, the three of us shoulder to shoulder now with our backs against the stone. And it circled us the way Curly had said it, pulled down a fence, post by post, patient, making its point about whose ground this was. It circled for what I would guess was an hour. It never crossed the light. And I understood, listening to that patient breathing go round and round, that it was not trying to get in. It was waiting. It had spent 2 days learning that these three men would not step away from each other. And so it had stopped asking us to. And now it was simply going to stay, breathing, circling, cold, until one of three things happened, until the fire burned down, or until dawn, or until one of us, worn past bearing by that endless patient breath, did the thing it had been unable to trick us into doing, and stepped out to end it. The fire was getting low. We had wood, but the wood was stacked 8 feet out from the wall, at the pile, past the edge of the light. And to feed the fire and hold the light that kept the thing back, one of us was going to have to leave the other two and walk out to the wood pile in the dark, where the breathing was. And this, I saw all at once with a clarity that has never left me, was the whole of its plan and always had been, from the first knot in the first locked cab. It had not needed to trick us into separating. It had only needed to wait until keeping the fire and staying together became the same impossible choice, until the light that saved us could only be fed by walking into the dark. My father stood up. He handed me the ledger, the green one with the rubber band, and he said, "Keep the count." And I did not understand him, and I've understood him every day since. He took the axe, not the rifle, because he said the rifle was for me and Curly to hold the door, and he stepped over the low fire and walked out toward the wood pile, into the dark, into the smell, straight toward the breathing. And he did it so that neither Curly nor I would. I am going to tell this as it happened, and no more than happened, because this is the part that the whole account has been walking toward. And it does not need me to raise my voice. My father walked to the woodpile. I could follow him for the first few steps by the last of the firelight on his back. And then he passed out of the light, and I could follow him only by sound of his boots in the frozen grass. Steady, not hurried, a man walking to a chore he has done 10,000 times. The breathing had stopped when he stood up. That is a thing I need you to hold. The moment he committed to the dark, the circling breath went silent, and the silence was the thing waiting to see if he would really come. He came. I heard him reach the pile. I heard the particular clatter of split piñon being gathered against a man's chest. 3 pieces, 4, ordinary. And for the length of that ordinary sound, I let myself believe that he would gather the wood and turn and walk back, and that we had all been wrong. Then I heard him say, very quietly, not afraid, almost gentle, "Harrison." He said his son's name once, out there in the dark, the way you say a name when you have turned and found someone standing closer than you knew. And I understood that the thing had let him get the wood, had let him have that one moment of the chore going right, so that when he turned, it would be wearing the face, but it knew would stop his hands, the face of the boy he had lost first, standing an arm's length away in the dark, close enough to touch. The wood fell. All of it at once, the clatter of it hitting the frozen ground. And there was no cry. That is the detail the bureau man could not get past when I told him a fraction of it years later. The detail he kept returning to, because he wanted a struggle, a shout, a sound of a man fighting. And there was none. There was the wood falling, and then there was a single sharp intake of breath. My father's. I knew his breathing. I had listened to it beside me for 3 nights, one sharp breath drawn in, the way you breathe in when very cold water closes over you. And then nothing. No exhale. The night simply took the sound of my father back and did not give it out again. Curly's hand was on my chest. I did not know I had risen until his hand and his whole weight bore me back down against the stone. And he was saying into my ear, fierce and low, that if I went out there, I gave it 3 men for the price of 1, and made my father's walk mean nothing. That the count was in my hands now, and I was to keep it. And I realized the old man was weeping while he said it, without any change in his voice, the tears just running in the firelight while he held me down with the strength of a much younger man. I have never in my life fought anything as hard as I fought that old man's arms, and I have thanked God every day since that I lost. The fire was dying. My father had gone for wood, and the wood lay scattered out there in the dark where he had dropped it. And now there were 2 of us, and no wood and a fire going down to coals. And the same choice my father had answered was sitting in front of me and Curly, only now with 1 fewer man to answer it. And the breathing came back, slow, even. That whistle at the top of it, closer than it had been all night, at the very edge of the coal's red light. And it began again to circle, patient, having spent 1 of us and found the arithmetic still in its favor. Curly made the decision for both of us, the way he had made every decision that kept me alive those 3 nights. He said we were not going to feed the fire, and we were not going to wait for the coals to die with us, sitting against a wall in the open. He said the cabin, the stone cabin with the 1 door and the 1 small window, my grandfather's cabin, which we had not sheltered in because a man in a closed room cannot see what comes, but which now, with the fire failing, was the only dark we could put a wall around. We backed to it together, the 2 of us, facing out, Curly's lever gun and my father's rifle, which I had taken up without deciding to. And we got the door shut, and we barred it with the plank bar my grandfather had cut for it. And we put our backs to the far wall, and we waited in the black with the little window, a gray square, and the smell coming up strong through the gaps in the old stone. It did not break the door. I want that recorded, because it could have. A thing that put a live dog on a smooth roof and folded 18 head of cattle out of a stone cut in 4 seconds did not need to break my grandfather's door. And it did not try. Instead, it came to the little window, and it filled it. The gray square went black. Something stood at the window in the dark and blotted the stars. And it breathed, and the smell rolled in. Wet dog and cold ash and old cellar meat. And it stood there, and it did not come in. And I understood that it did not come in, because it did not need to. It only wanted us to know it could. It only wanted us to know whose ground the cabin stood on, and whose door that was, and how little the door meant. Then it spoke at the window. And it did not use Harrison's voice or my mother's or Roman's. It used my father's, but not my father as I had known him. It used the sound of my father's last sharp indrawn breath. That one sound of very cold water closing over a man. And it made that sound at the window, over and over, slow, patient. The sound of my father being taken played back to me in the dark for what I would guess was an hour, while Curly held my arm and neither of us made a sound. Because we had both understood by then that any sound we gave it was a sound it would keep. I will not pretend I know why it stopped. Near what must have been the last hour before the light, the smell thinned. The black square of the window went gray again, then paler. The breathing withdrew, not all at once, but by degrees, circling wider, fainter, until it was out past the corrals, and then out past the rise. And then it was only the wind that was not wind. And then it was only my own blood in my ears. Curly would not let me open the door. We sat against the wall through the whole slow coming of the light, and only when the little window was full white daylight and a canyon wren started up somewhere down by the spring. An ordinary bird singing an ordinary morning. Did the old man let go of my arm. We lifted the bar. The morning was clear and cold and completely still. The horses were alive in the lean-to, both of them, sweated white and shaking, but alive. The fire was a ring of dead ash. And out at the woodpile where my father had fallen, there was no blood, no drag mark, no sign of a struggle, no body. There were 4 pieces of split piñón lying scattered on the frozen ground where they had fallen from his arms. And there was the axe, laid down, not dropped, laid down, set flat and square on the ground, the way a man sets a tool. He means to come back for and around it. In the 2 inches of old snow that had not melted in that shaded lee of the pile, there was one set of tracks. The same tracks I had seen by the loading chute on the first morning and had said I would come back to. I will describe them now. Once, plainly. And then I'm done describing them, because I've spent 47 years not describing them. They were the tracks of a very large canid, a wolf if you like, wider across than my spread hand, pressed deep as if the thing that made them weighed far more than any wolf. And they walked on 2 legs, not a wolf's 4-footed trot with the hind feet landing in the 4 prints, which any tracker will tell you looks like 2-legged walking to a frightened man. I knew that trick. Curly had taught it to me as a boy. These were 2 prints, and 2 prints only, left and right and left and right, striding upright, the stride of a tall man, pressed by the weight of something that was not a man. Walking away from where my father had stood, out toward the rise, unhurried, and stopping, this is the last of it, stopping at the foot of the sandstone where the tall horned figure is carved, and not going on. The tracks ended there. They did not climb the rise, and they did not turn around. They simply ended at the carving, as if whatever made them had reached the place it belonged, and had no further need of feet. Curly looked at the tracks for a long time. Then he looked at the carving, the tall, horned figure the old people had told me not to look at too long. And he looked at it a long time, longer than I had ever been allowed to. And he said one sentence in English so that I would carry it out with me. He said, "It was here before the permit, and it will be here after." Then we caught the 2 horses, and we did not gather my father, because there was nothing to gather. And we rode out east over the open ground the way my father had planned. 2 men on 2 horses, and nothing stood in our way, and nothing followed. And a little after noon, on the 17th of November, 1978, we came down off the shelf and struck the paved road. And it was over. The count, when I closed the ledger, stood at 2. The official account took 9 days to assemble and runs to a page and a half. I have a copy. I sent for it in 1994 out of a need I still cannot fully explain. And it came in a manila envelope from a records office in Window Rock. And reading it was its own kind of grief. The tribal police in the county worked it together because of where the line ran. They recovered the truck at the wash below Mrs. Nez's, and it started for the deputy on the 2nd try, which I had known it would. And that starting became a small fact that worked against everything I said afterward. because a man whose truck starts fine for the deputy is a man whose story about the truck is already suspect. They found Roman B. Gay's hat at the Hogan and no Roman. They found the pole corrals empty and the loading chutes standing and the pump house with a stain on the roof where a dog had lain and gone to nothing in the weeks before anyone climbed up to look. They did not find my father. They did not find Harrison. They found 63 heads still on the shelf, thin and wild-eyed, but alive, and drove them down, and the buyer in Flagstaff took them at a lower weight. And that money paid for nothing that mattered. The finding, in the end, was this. 2 men, Wilson and Harrison Tsosie, and 1 hired man, Roman B. Gay, lost on a winter range, cause undetermined, exposure and predation probable, foul play not excluded, but unsupported by evidence. The 18 missing cattle were entered as the line I read you at the beginning. Predation, probable, canid, weather aggravated. There is a sentence in the deputy's notes, not in the final finding, that says the surviving witness's account contained elements inconsistent with the physical evidence and with each other. And that sentence is true, and it is the truest thing in the whole document, because Curly and I did not tell it the same, on purpose. We had agreed, writing out, that we would each hold back a different piece, so that if one of us was written off as broken, the other might still be believed. It did not work. We were both written off. But I understand now that we were not really trying to be believed. We were trying to keep the pieces from being assembled into one account, because we had both come to feel, without saying it, that the thing on that shelf fed on being counted, on being looked at squarely and named and filed, and that the kindest thing we could do for the men who came after was to leave the record incomplete on purpose. So the omission in the official account is not the government's. It is mine. I put it there. Curly died in the spring of 1981 of an ordinary old man's heart in his own bed near Pinon. And I was glad for him that it was ordinary and it was his own bed. He never went back up on that shelf, and neither did I. The permit reverted. My mother would not let it be worked and would not let it be sold. And it sits to this day, I am told, ungrazed, 31 miles of dirt track from the paved road. And the spring still runs clear at the foot of the rise, and the tall, horned figure is still carved into the sandstone above it. And I have made my peace with never seeing any of it again. Here is the private residue, the part that is only mine, that no records office has, and that I have carried the way you carry a stone, in a boot you cannot take off. I kept the count. My father put the ledger in my hands and said, "Keep the count," and I have kept it. That green book with the rubber band is on the shelf above me, beside the coffee can with the knot of picket rope in it. And the last entry is still in my father's pencil 81, and beneath it his one sentence. The count is being kept against us. And beneath that, in my own hand, the number 2, which I wrote at the paved road, and have never changed. For 47 years that number has been correct. 2 men came off the shelf, but I am the last of the 2 now. And Curly is 30 years gone. And by the arithmetic that thing was keeping, the arithmetic my father understood at the end, and I did not. The count is very nearly closed. It has been patient before. It was patient for 2 days on a fire, and patient for the years Curly's grandfather lived after his brother was taken. And I do not flatter myself that 47 years is long to a thing that was there before the permit and will be there after. I do not hear the voices anymore. I want to be honest and say that plainly, because a lesser account would tell you I lie awake hearing my father's last breath at the window. And I do not. And the not hearing is its own particular fear, because it means the thing has no further need to trick me. It knows what I know. It knows I told the record wrong on purpose, and it knows why. And I have come to think it does not mind. The way a man does not mind a fence he could push over post by post whenever he chose. The dog is the thing I leave you with, because it is the thing no one has ever explained, and because it is small enough to hold in your mind after the rest of this fades. Nodley on the roof of the pump house, 40 feet up a smooth, galvanized wall, legs folded neat, not a mark on her, put there in the first dark before it took anything else. I used to think it was cruelty, or a trophy, or a threat. I have come to think it was none of those. I have come to think it was the first line of the ledger it was keeping, written where we could not miss it. A plain animal set in a plain, impossible place, so that on the very first morning, before my brother was cold, we would already know the truth and spend 3 days refusing it. It was showing us the arithmetic at the top of the page. It was telling us, in the only language it had, that the counting had already begun, and that the count was being kept, and that the count was not ours. I have kept it anyway, 2. As near as I can reconstruct it, that is the number, and it will hold until it does not. And the man who finds this account should understand that the shelf is still there, and the spring still runs clear, and the figure is still carved above it, and that the ground was never ours, and that it is waiting, without hurry, for the count to come out even.